So this is a comparison video of the M1 MacBook Air with the MacBook Pro 14-inch with the M1 Pro chip. And the reason I am making this video is because I bought the 14-inch MacBook Pro because there was a good deal at Best Buy. There was a $400 discount on that, which is one of the biggest discounts I've seen on an Apple product. So this MacBook Pro 14-inch was overall $1,600, which I thought was an amazing deal for $400 off versus this M1 MacBook Air, which I got at the end of 2020 for $900 with the education discount. And this is just how they look side by side. I have to say I actually prefer the M1 MacBook Air design to the MacBook Pro 14-inch because it's a bit sleeker. This is kind of back when the design language is more to go for a thinner, sleeker look, while the new design is kind of going for a bulkier look to try to increase battery life and also add more ports. So in terms of the port connectivity, there's a SD card slot, there's a USB-C here as well as an HDMI cable. On the other side you have two USB-C as well as MagSafe, which is back for this new model. For the M1 MacBook Air, you only have two USB-C ports on the left side of the unit. But as you can see, the 14-inch Pro is just a lot thicker and heftier than the MacBook Air. And I'd kind of call it chunkier too. It's just a boxier design. I would say the design actually is a bit dated. It went backwards in terms of how modern it looks. But I really just bought it for the price because it was such a good deal. Otherwise, some other differences are that this is almost a pound heavier as well. So in terms of portability, this is also not as portable. You do feel it when you carry it in your bag throughout the day. However, if you just kind of lift it here and there, it's really not too big of a difference. And the other thing is the MacBook Air does come with a lot of different colors. Of course, this is the M1 variant, and there is the M2 now, which does follow the newer design language, a bit more boxier, a bit more rounded. But I honestly think this is a sweet spot. I really like the sleekness, the sharp edges, and also the tapered design as well. And I thought this was such a great deal because this base MacBook Pro 14-inch is normally $2,000 at retail. And the specs are the M1 Pro chip, which is slightly faster than the original M1 chip. It comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of SSD storage. So for $400 off, this is an amazing deal. The M1 MacBook Air, however, was also a great deal as well. It was $900 with the education discount, and the specs are the M1 chip, which is the original Apple Silicon chip, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and 256 gigabytes of SSD storage. And in terms of the size, some other upgrades are that this screen is supposed to be faster with the 120 Hz refresh rate, which is ProMotion. And it's also a bigger screen at 14-inch for not that big or not that different of a footprint. If you look at the two from top down, you see that there's barely a difference. It's a little bit wider, but not really between the two. And this is just a clip of how it looks with the laptops open when you're looking at the back. As you notice, the new MacBook Pro 14-inch has a larger Apple icon, but it does have this thicker rim to it versus this kind of tapered edge that looks a lot more sleek and slim. And if you were to stack them on top of each other and look at it from top down to compare their footprints, there isn't really that big of a difference in the footprint for a much larger screen at 14 inches for the MacBook Pro versus a 13.3-inch screen on the MacBook Air. And this is how they look when you open them up. Again, I do prefer the design of the MacBook Air. I just like the background of the keyboard being consistent with the rest of the body. While the new design's a bit odd, it almost looks like there's an extra keyboard just plastered onto the casing of the MacBook itself. The other thing is you do notice the screen. It's a little bit bigger and a little bit taller, which gives you a lot more screen real estate as well. Otherwise, the keyboards themselves are actually the same size in terms of the keys, the length and width. However, I did notice that typing on the new MacBook Pro is a bit more difficult only because there's a slight tapered edge to the Air, so it's easier to reach the keys, while the keys on the Pro are a bit farther when you're actually using them. The other thing I noticed is that I prefer the touchpad on the MacBook Air as well because it has a tighter click to it. When you press, it just feels more compact. There's, I guess, a higher pitch click, which just feels like a lot more solid, while the touchpad on this almost feels a bit hollow. I don't know if it's just because the casing is a bit more open, there's more air for ventilation, but when you press this, there's a duller thud to it. and it feels a bit hollow when you press it. So there isn't this compact feel to it. It almost feels lower quality because of that. Same with the keyboard keys as well. It feels a lot more tighter and clicky here. The tactile feedback is really nice. While this does feel a bit looser and a bit like almost like there may be flex in the keyboard, although there isn't. So those are the two things I noticed in terms of the experience with the touchpad and the keyboard. And next, if we were to compare the two screens, you do see a big difference in terms of the size and the bezels. So for the MacBook Pro 14-inch, you do have this much thinner bezel, which allows for a larger screen and just more screen real estate on the body. So you have the 14-inch screen there, 13.3-inch screen here. The other thing you do notice is the notch, which I thought would be a bit annoying, but you really only see it in the desktop view, because once you go into full screen modes for other apps, it gets completely blocked out. And the thing is, the full screen actually starts right where this notch ends. The rest of the space next to the notch is actually saved for the options on the menu bar. So when you go into full screen for Safari and hover your mouse to the top, all the menu bar options are right next to the notch. And the full screen itself is actually below it. So that's why they're able to cover it, and you really just don't notice it when you're using it. The other difference is that this does have the 120 Hertz ProMotion, which I thought would be a feature I would really enjoy. However, I don't really think it's that big of an upgrade to the old Air, because you don't really notice it. It may be there and you do notice a slight difference, but the MacBook Air was more than fast enough. And this type of ProMotion display, I did notice a bigger difference on the iPads, but with the MacBooks, it doesn't really change the experience too much. So yeah, I'm not really too big on it. It's nice, but not necessary for MacBook usage. And another thing I wanted to touch on is the speed between the two. So the Pro comes with the M1 Pro chip, which is supposed to be newer and faster. And I'm sure for more intensive tasks like video editing and for exporting large files, you may notice the speed difference a lot more. But for just daily usage, for browsing online, for emails, I haven't really noticed that much of a difference, and I've had this for the past week so far. And this is compared to my 2-year-old M1 MacBook Air. And so I'm just going to give you an example right now. I'm just going to look up Blackpink on YouTube and see how fast it takes to load each page. So I'm going to press enter. And as you can see, they're pretty similar. It's really not that much slower. It may be a bigger difference when loading videos, so let's see how that plays out. Yeah, it's really not that different. And the other thing I did notice that is a big difference though is the speaker quality on the MacBook M1 Pro. It's probably the best speakers I've heard. And the Air I thought was actually already really good. It's as good as the iPad Pros, but let's just play them to compare the two sounds. Okay, let's just compare it to this. Okay, so as you can see here, the speaker system is just so much better on the Pro. I'm not a huge audiophile, but in my opinion, I feel like there's a much wider soundstage. It just feels like there's a lot more space to the sound. And the bass is a lot cleaner and the vocals sound a lot more crisp to me as well. So that's a huge factor for you. That may be something to consider between the two. However, for just the general day user, for college students, I'd still think the M1 MacBook Air is a great buy. It's much more portable, it's much slimmer, and in terms of speed, it's really not that much slower than the M1 Pro for a much cheaper price. Of course, I still think this was a great deal because it was $400 off from the standard retail price of $2,000 and does come with more RAM at 16 gig RAM versus 8 gig and comes with 512 gigabytes of SSD storage. But yeah, for general daily use, I haven't really noticed that big of a difference or feel like that much of an upgrade with using the Pro versus the Air. Just a few things are the slightly faster screen, which isn't a big upgrade. You don't really notice it too much. The main upgrade I've noticed is the speaker system and the slightly larger screen. So that's what you take advantage of when you go up to the larger screen size. The other reason to get the Pro is also if you are a a huge YouTuber or you do video editing or things that are very intensive, then of course the better chip would be better. But for normal things such as daily browsing, like website browsing, emails, iMessages, things like that, this should be more than good enough. And it's still pretty fast for a 2-year-old laptop.